Wait. She's still wearing the collar from her last owner. The crowd gathered in Fort Bridger's dusty street fell silent, staring at the iron band locked around her throat. July 1872. Wyoming Territory. A 21-year-old woman stood on the auction block for the third time in 2 years, bound wrists bleeding through the rope, a metal collar welded shut around her neck like she was livestock. The railroad magnate who'd clamped it on her 6 months ago was dead. And now his estate was selling her off like furniture. Bidding started at $50. A merchant with hungry eyes called out $60. A rancher whose reputation made grown men nervous offered $75. Then a voice cut through the crowd like a rifle shot. $100. Cowboy. Mid-20s. Weathered face. Hazel eyes that looked at her face. Not her body, not the collar, but her. When the gavel fell, he paid in gold, cut the ropes from her wrists, and pulled out a knife. She flinched, bracing for violence. Instead, he positioned metal cutters around the collar and said, "This might pinch. Hold still." The collar fell away in 2 pieces. But what he did next? That's when she knew this man was different. He walked outside, dug a hole 3 feet deep near the edge of his property, and buried those collar pieces like he was putting down something evil that should never see daylight again. The question is, what happened when 3 armed men rode onto his ranch 2 months later, demanding he return the property he'd purchased?
Every story deserves to be heard. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Your voice keeps the past alive.
The iron collar around my neck gleamed dully in the scorching Wyoming sun, and I wondered if I would die wearing it like the animal they had made me. Standing in the center of Fort Bridger's dusty Main Street in July of 1872, I was being auctioned off like livestock for the 3rd time in 2 years, my wrists bound with coarse rope that had rubbed my skin raw and bleeding. The man who had owned me last, a railroad magnate named Thaddeus Crane, had clamped that collar around my throat 6 months ago when I had tried to run, telling me I was property, nothing more, that I had no rights, no future, no hope of ever being anything but what he decided I would be. Now Crane was dead from a heart seizure, and his estate was liquidating everything he owned, including the 21-year-old woman he had purchased from a San Francisco gambling den to settle a debt. My name is Catherine Morrison, though I barely remembered what it felt like to be called by my own name instead of girl or you there, or worse things I won't repeat. I was 21 years old, though the hardness in my blue eyes made me seem ancient, like I had lived 100 years in those 2 decades. My dark auburn hair hung limp and tangled past my shoulders, matted with dust and sweat, and the thin cotton dress I wore was stained and torn at the hem from weeks of wear without washing. But the collar was the worst part, a constant reminder that I had no say in my own life, that men like Crane could do whatever they wanted to women who had no family, no protection, no legal standing in a world built by men for men. The weight of it pressed against my throat with every breath, a circle of cold iron that proclaimed my status to everyone who looked at me. I had tried everything to get it off, had spent hours with a rock trying to break the weld, had rubbed my neck raw trying to twist it loose, but Crane had paid a blacksmith good money to make sure it would never come off without proper tools. He wanted me marked, wanted everyone to know I belonged to him, wanted me to feel that ownership every single moment of every single day. I had been born to a prostitute in Sacramento who died when I was 14, leaving me alone in a world that devoured young women without mercy, without even noticing their screams. My mother had tried to protect me, had kept me hidden in our small room above the saloon, had taught me to read and write in secret because she wanted me to have a chance at something better. But when the consumption took her, coughing blood into rags she tried to hide from me, I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a debt I didn't owe. A crooked saloon owner named Marcus Webb had claimed I owed him money for my mother's room and board, her medical care, even the wooden box they buried her in. The amount kept growing every time I questioned it, and when I tried to leave, he had men drag me back and lock me in a storage room for 3 days without food or water. That was when I learned that the law didn't protect girls like me, that sheriffs looked the other way when men like Webb did whatever they wanted, that my mother's dreams for me had died with her in that cramped, stinking room. From there, my life had become a series of transactions, each more degrading than the last, each one stealing another piece of whatever humanity I had left. Webb sold my contract to a merchant named Howard Pierce who wanted a housekeeper, or so he claimed. Pierce was a fat man with soft hands and hard eyes, and he made it clear within the first hour what my real duties would be. I tried to fight him that first night, scratched his face deep enough to leave scars, and he beat me so badly I couldn't stand for 2 days. After that, I learned not to fight, learned to go somewhere else in my mind while he used my body, learned that survival sometimes meant swallowing your pride and your rage and your tears until you could find a way out. I spent 8 months with Pierce, cooking his meals and washing his clothes and enduring his nightly visits, saving every scrap of food I could steal, hiding a few coins here and there when he was too drunk to count his money properly. I had almost saved enough to buy a ticket east when he caught me with the hidden coins and sold me to pay off a gambling debt. The second man was worse. His name was Vincent Kane, a professional gambler who had won me in a card game like I was a horse or a piece of furniture. Kane was younger than Pierce, maybe 35, handsome in a cold way that made my skin crawl. He kept me locked in a hotel room for 6 months, coming and going as he pleased, bringing other men sometimes who paid him to use me while he watched and counted his money. I tried to kill myself twice during those months, once with a piece of broken glass I hid under the mattress, once by trying to hang myself with a bedsheet. Both times Kane found me and beat me and told me I wasn't allowed to die until he decided I could, that I was his property and my life belonged to him. He hired a woman to watch me after that, an old Chinese woman who spoke no English but understood perfectly well that her job was to keep me alive and available. I stopped trying to die after that, stopped trying to do anything except survive 1 more day, 1 more hour, 1 more minute. Kane eventually tired of me, or maybe he just needed money, because he sold me to Thaddeus Crane for $200 and a gold pocket watch. Crane was different from the others, at least on the surface. He was educated, wealthy, respected in business circles. He owned hotels and railroad shares and had a mansion in San Francisco with servants and fine furniture and everything that was supposed to indicate civilization and culture. But behind closed doors, Crane was the cruelest of them all, a man who enjoyed breaking women the way other men enjoyed breaking horses. He didn't just want my body, he wanted my spirit, wanted to see the moment when I gave up completely and accepted that I was nothing but his property. That was when he put the collar on me, had a blacksmith weld it shut around my neck after I tried to run, made me wear it every day as a reminder of what I was. The auctioneer, a pot-bellied man with tobacco-stained teeth and breath that smelled like rotting meat, rattled off my supposed qualities like I was a mare being sold for breeding. Strong back, good with cooking and cleaning, young enough to bear children, trained for household duties. We'll start the bidding at $50. I kept my eyes down, refusing to look at the men gathered around, knowing from experience that showing defiance only made things worse, only made them want to break you more. But inside, rage burned like a furnace that had been stoked for 7 years, rage at every man who had bought me, used me, sold me, rage at a world that allowed this to happen, rage at God or fate or whatever force had decided this should be my life. I would rather die than belong to another man who thought money gave him ownership of my body and soul. But I had learned that dying wasn't as easy as it seemed, that survival had its own terrible momentum. $50, called out a merchant with greedy eyes and fat fingers that reminded me too much of Howard Pierce. 60, countered a rancher whose hands looked like they had crushed things before, whose reputation I knew from whispered conversations in the crowd. I had heard about him, about what happened to the last woman he had bought, how she had disappeared and nobody asked questions. My stomach turned and I calculated my chances of running, but with my wrists bound and the collar marking me as owned property, I wouldn't make it 10 feet before someone dragged me back. The territory had laws about runaways, and those laws were not written to protect women like me. I would be whipped, probably, maybe branded, definitely returned to whoever bought me with additional charges for the trouble. $100. The voice cut through the bidding like a knife through silk, deep and steady and somehow different from the others, though I couldn't have explained why. The crowd parted and I saw him for the first time, this man who would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. He was tall, probably 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and dark brown hair that needed cutting. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim pants, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing forearms corded with muscle, worn leather boots, and a hat that had seen better days. But what struck me most were his eyes, a clear hazel that looked directly at my face, not at my body, not at the collar, but at me, at my eyes, like he was trying to see the person underneath all the damage. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like I was actually a person that I almost flinched from the directness of his gaze. The auctioneer's eyes lit up with greed, practically gleaming in the harsh sunlight. $100 from Ethan Barrett. Do I hear 110? The rancher who had bid 60 shook his head and walked away, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't hear but could guess from the angry set of his shoulders. The merchant looked furious but stayed silent, probably calculating whether I was worth more than $100 to him. $100 was a substantial sum in 1872, more than most cowboys made in 3 months of backbreaking work, enough to buy a decent horse or a month's worth of supplies for a small ranch. The fact that this cowboy was willing to spend that much on a woman he'd never met should have told me something, but I was too numb with fear and exhaustion to think clearly. Going once, going twice, sold to Ethan Barrett for $100. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot, and I felt something inside me break a little more, another piece of whatever hope I had left crumbling into dust. It didn't matter that this man had kind eyes or that his voice sounded gentle. Men with kind eyes could still be monsters when they got you alone, when there was nobody watching, when you were their property and they could do whatever they wanted. I had learned that lesson too many times, had the scars on my body and my soul to prove it. Pierce had seemed gentle at first, promising me safety and protection. Cain had been charming when he wanted to be, buying me gifts and calling me pretty. Crane had treated me like a lady in public, opening doors and pulling out chairs. And then behind closed doors, they had all shown their true faces. Ethan stepped forward and counted out the money in gold coins, which the auctioneer snatched eagerly, biting one to test its authenticity before pocketing the lot. Then Ethan turned to me and pulled a knife from his belt, a long hunting knife with a worn wooden handle that looked like it had seen plenty of use. I flinched instinctively, my body tensing for violence, every muscle preparing for pain because knives meant punishment, meant lessons about obedience, meant scars that would never fully heal. But instead of grabbing me, instead of cutting my clothes or pressing the blade against my skin to make me understand who was in charge, he carefully cut the ropes binding my wrists. His movements slow and deliberate, like he was trying not to startle a wounded animal. "You're going to bleed if we don't clean those," he said quietly, looking at the raw wounds the rope had left, places where my skin had been rubbed completely away, exposing raw flesh that burned in the hot sun. His voice was surprisingly gentle, without the edge of ownership that I had learned to recognize in men's voices when they spoke to property they had just purchased. I stared at him, not understanding, my mind unable to process what was happening because it didn't match any pattern I knew. Every man who had ever purchased me had immediately established dominance, had made it clear what my purpose was, had taken what they paid for within the first hour. But Ethan Barrett just stood there, knife in hand, waiting for something I couldn't name. "Can you walk?" he asked, and I realized he was actually asking, actually waiting for my answer instead of just ordering me to follow. I nodded mutely, not trusting my voice, not sure what would come out if I tried to speak. My throat was dry from standing in the sun all morning, and the collar pressed against my windpipe in a way that made every breath feel labored. "My horse is at the livery. We have a ride ahead of us." He gestured toward the edge of town, and I followed because I had no choice, because running would only make things worse, because this was my life now whether I wanted it or not. As we walked through Fort Bridger's streets, I was acutely aware of the collar around my neck, the way it rubbed against my skin with every step, the way it caught the sunlight and reflected it like a beacon proclaiming my status to everyone we passed. Women looked at me with pity or disgust, their faces turning away as if my shame was contagious, as if acknowledging what I was might somehow taint them. Men looked at me with curiosity or contempt or hunger, their eyes sliding over my body in a way that made my skin crawl. Children stared openly until their mothers pulled them away, whispering warnings about what happened to bad girls who didn't behave. I kept my eyes on the ground, following Ethan's boot steps in the dust, watching the way his shadow fell across the rutted street, trying not to think about what was coming next. At the livery stable. He had 2 horses saddled and ready, a large chestnut gelding with intelligent eyes and a smaller bay mare that looked fast and sure-footed. He gestured to the bay. "You can ride." I found my voice finally, rough from disuse because Crane had not allowed me to speak unless spoken to. Had trained me with his fists to stay silent unless he wanted to hear me. "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Good. It's about 15 miles to my ranch. We should make it before dark if we leave now." He helped me mount, his hands impersonal and efficient, touching me only as much as necessary to boost me into the saddle, nothing like the groping hands I had learned to expect from men. Then he swung up onto his own horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle, and we rode out of Fort Bridger heading northeast toward land I didn't know, toward a future I couldn't predict, toward whatever fate this stranger had planned for me. The Wyoming landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling hills covered with sagebrush and wild grass, mountains rising in the distance like sentinels watching over this harsh, beautiful, unforgiving land. The sky was so vast it made me feel insignificant, but also somehow free in a way I hadn't felt in years, like maybe out here in all this emptiness I could disappear, could become someone other than what I had been made to be. We rode in silence for over an hour. The only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, the creak of leather saddles, the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead looking for prey. My mind raced with possibilities, each darker than the last, each more terrifying than the one before. Maybe Ethan Barrett didn't want to establish his ownership in public, didn't want witnesses to whatever he planned to do. Maybe he was taking me somewhere isolated where no one would hear me scream, where my body might never be found if things went wrong. Maybe he was one of those men who liked to play gentle before showing his true nature, who got pleasure from making you trust them before they betrayed that trust in the cruelest possible way. I had known men like that, men who smiled while they hurt you, who whispered sweet words while their hands did terrible things. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down without mercy, and sweat trickled down my back under the thin cotton dress. My wrists throbbed where the rope had cut into them, and I could feel blood seeping through the torn skin, but I didn't say anything because complaining had never helped, had only ever made things worse. The bay mare moved smoothly beneath me, responsive to the slightest pressure, and I remembered learning to ride as a child when my mother had briefly worked for a family with horses. That felt like another lifetime, another person entirely, some innocent girl who still believed the world might be kind. Finally, as the sun started to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that were almost painfully beautiful, Ethan slowed his horse to a walk. I did the same, my muscles tense with anxiety, preparing for whatever was about to happen. "That collar," Ethan said without looking at me, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Did Crane put that on you?" My hand went instinctively to my throat, fingers touching the cold iron that had become as familiar as my own skin. "Yes." "Does it have a lock?" "No, it's welded shut. He had a blacksmith do it. Said it would stay on until I died or until he decided otherwise." Ethan was quiet for a moment, and I saw his jaw tighten, saw something like anger flash across his face, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at me or at Crane or at the whole rotten system that made such things possible. "When we get to the ranch, I'm going to cut it off. I want you to know that ahead of time, so you're not frightened when I come at you with metal cutters." My breath caught in my chest, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he had just said because it made no sense. "Why?" The question came out before I could stop it, before I could remember that questioning men was dangerous, that it led to punishment. "Because no human being should wear a collar like a dog." His voice was hard with anger, but I sensed it wasn't directed at me, wasn't the kind of anger that would lead to violence against me. "Because what Crane did was wrong and I won't have it on my land, won't have that symbol of his cruelty and your suffering anywhere near my home." I didn't know what to say to that, didn't have words for the confusion and hope and terror swirling through me. Every response that came to mind seemed inadequate or dangerous, like maybe this was a test, like maybe he was waiting to see if I would show gratitude or defiance or something else he could use against me. So I said nothing, and we continued riding as the sun dipped lower and the air grew cooler, and I tried not to let myself hope because hope was the most dangerous thing of all. Ethan's ranch appeared as we crested a low hill, a modest spread with a sturdy log cabin, a barn that looked well-maintained, a corral with several horses moving lazily in the evening light, and what looked like good grazing land extending toward a creek lined with cottonwood trees. It wasn't grand, wasn't the kind of place that spoke of wealth or power, but it looked solid and honest, the kind of place built by hard work rather than inherited wealth or stolen money. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, and I realized he must have left a fire banked before coming to town, must have planned ahead for bringing someone back here. We dismounted in front of the barn, and Ethan took both horses to unsaddle and brush down, working with the kind of care that spoke of genuine affection for the animals. I stood awkwardly, not sure what was expected of me, my body tense and waiting for orders because in my previous situations the rules had been made brutally clear within the first hour. Here I had no framework to understand what was happening, no pattern to follow, no previous experience to guide me through whatever this was. "You must be hungry," Ethan said as he led the horses into the barn. His voice casual, like this was a normal conversation between normal people. "There's food in the cabin. Go ahead and eat whatever you want. I'll be in shortly." He said it like I had a choice, like I was allowed to make decisions about when and what I ate. And that simple assumption of autonomy was so foreign that I almost didn't know how to respond. I walked slowly to the cabin, half expecting a trap, half waiting for the door to be locked or for something to jump out at me. But the door opened easily, and inside I found a single large room with a stone fireplace, a bed in one corner covered with a patchwork quilt, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and books, and a small kitchen area with a cast-iron stove that radiated warmth. It was clean and organized, the home of someone who took care of what they had, who valued order and cleanliness not for show but for genuine comfort. I saw only one bed, and my stomach clenched with familiar dread because that meant he expected me to share it, expected me to perform the duties that came with being purchased property. Of course he did. That was always what men wanted, always what these transactions were really about, no matter what pretty words they used to disguise it. I had been foolish to think otherwise. Foolish to let his gentle manner make me hope for something different. I found bread and cheese and dried meat on the shelves, along with a jar of preserved peaches that made my mouth water because I hadn't tasted anything sweet in months, hadn't had anything but scraps and leftovers since Crane died. My hands shook as I cut slices of bread and cheese, the knife heavy and unfamiliar because I hadn't been trusted with sharp objects in so long. The bread was fresh, probably only a day old, and the cheese was good quality, not the moldy scraps I had gotten used to. I ate standing up, too nervous to sit, too afraid to let my guard down even for a moment. I was still eating when Ethan came in carrying metal cutters and a small leather pouch, and my whole body went rigid with instinctive fear. "Let me see that collar," he said, setting the tools on the table with a heavy thunk that made me flinch. I stopped chewing, my body going absolutely still, every muscle tensed for fight or flight even though I knew both were useless. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere in this vast empty territory where a woman alone could survive, especially a woman marked as property. I had learned long ago that running only made the punishment worse, only gave them an excuse to hurt you more, to teach you lessons you would never forget. Ethan must have seen the fear in my eyes because he held up his hands, palms out, in a gesture of peace, stopping several feet away from me. "I'm just going to cut it off. That's all. I promise you I'm not going to hurt you." His voice was calm and steady, like he was talking to a spooked horse, like he understood exactly how terrified I was and why. "Men always say that," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them, before I could remember that contradicting men was dangerous. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something like pain cross his face, saw genuine regret in his eyes that I didn't know how to interpret. "I know. And I know you have no reason to trust me, not after everything you've been through, not after all the men who have lied to you and hurt you. But I'm asking you to let me do this one thing. After that, if you want to leave, I'll give you money and a horse and supplies, and you can go wherever you want. But I need to get that damned collar off your neck first. I need to see it gone." I didn't believe him about letting me leave. Couldn't believe him because men never let their property just walk away, never gave up what they had paid for without getting their money's worth first. But I also knew I had no real choice in the matter. Knew that refusing would only make whatever was coming worse. Slowly, like I was walking toward my own execution, I approached him and tilted my chin up, exposing the collar and my throat, making myself vulnerable in the most primal way possible. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Thought he might hear it and know exactly how terrified I was. Ethan positioned the metal cutters carefully, his hands steady and sure, and I could smell leather and horse and clean sweat on him, could feel the warmth of his body standing so close to mine. This might pinch a little, but I'll be as quick as I can. Hold still. The sound of metal shearing through metal was loud in the quiet cabin, a screeching, screaming sound that made my teeth ache. I felt pressure against my throat, uncomfortable but not painful, nothing like the beatings I had braced myself for, nothing like the violence I had learned to expect. And then suddenly the collar fell away in 2 pieces, clattering onto the table with a sound like chains breaking, like freedom, like possibility. The absence of weight around my neck was so sudden and strange that I gasped, my hand flying to my throat to touch bare skin for the first time in 6 months. There was an indentation where the collar had pressed into my flesh, a groove worn into my skin from constant wear, but the metal was gone. The hated, horrible, degrading symbol of my slavery was gone. "There," Ethan said quietly, and his voice was rough with emotion I couldn't name. He picked up the severed collar with an expression of pure disgust, holding it like it was something contaminated, something evil. "Wait here." He walked outside and I stood frozen, my fingers exploring the indentation the collar had left on my skin, feeling the strange lightness of my head without that weight pulling down on my neck. I heard the sound of digging metal striking earth in a steady rhythm, and when curiosity overcame caution and I went to the door, I saw Ethan in the fading light using a shovel to excavate a deep hole near the edge of his property, far from the house and the barn. He dug down at least 3 feet, maybe more. His movements angry and forceful like he was attacking the earth itself. Then he dropped the collar pieces into the hole and buried them, packing the earth down firmly, stamping on it with his boots, as though he were interring something evil that should never see daylight again, something that needed to be put down deep where it could never hurt anyone. When he came back inside, his hands were dirty and his expression was grim but also somehow satisfied, like he had accomplished something important. "That's done. You'll never wear anything like that again. Not while I'm alive to prevent it." I felt tears prick my eyes and I turned away quickly, not wanting him to see, not wanting to show weakness because tears only made men feel more powerful, only made them understand how completely they controlled you. I had taught myself not to cry years ago, had learned to swallow every sob and hide every tear because crying brought punishment or mockery or unwanted comfort that turned into something worse. But the simple act of destroying that collar, of literally burying it deep in the Wyoming earth like it was something shameful that needed to be hidden, had cracked something in the armor I wore around my heart. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice barely audible, thick with emotions I didn't know how to process. Ethan washed his hands in a bucket of water by the door, scrubbing away the dirt with harsh lye soap. "You should finish eating. Then we need to talk about some things, need to establish what happens next." I returned to the table but my appetite had vanished, replaced by anxiety about what this conversation would bring, what expectations he would lay out, what price I would have to pay for his kindness in removing the collar. I watched him warily as he sat down across from me, his large frame making the chair look small, his presence filling the room in a way that should have been threatening but somehow wasn't. He folded his hands on the table and met my eyes directly, not looking away, not letting me hide from whatever he was about to say. "Here's the situation," he said, his voice serious and measured. "I bought you today because I couldn't stand watching you sold to men who were going to use you badly, men whose reputations I knew, whose previous property had disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. I know that doesn't make me a hero, doesn't absolve me of participating in a system that treats human beings like property. I'm not proud of what I did, not proud of the fact that I had to buy you to save you. But what's done is done, and now we need to figure out what comes next, how you're going to live your life from here." I said nothing, waiting for the other boot to drop, waiting for him to explain what he really wanted, what duties I would be expected to perform in exchange for food and shelter. You can leave if you want, Ethan continued, and his voice was sincere in a way that made me want to believe him even though I knew better. I meant what I said outside. I'll give you money and a horse and supplies, enough to get you to California or back east or wherever you think you might have a chance at a decent life. I won't stop you. I won't chase you. If you want to go, you can go right now tonight, and I'll help you prepare for the journey. But I'm going to be honest with you about what that means. A woman alone on the frontier is vulnerable in ways you already know too well. You'll be prey for every man who sees you, every person who wants to take advantage. The law won't protect you. Society won't protect you. You'll be alone with whatever money I can give you, and that money won't last forever. So you need to think carefully about whether leaving is really freedom or just a different kind of danger. I had already thought about this, had spent the entire ride from Fort Bridger calculating the odds, weighing my options. He was right. A woman alone out here was as good as dead, or worse than dead. What's the alternative? I asked, my voice flat and emotionless, trying not to show how desperately I wanted there to be another option. You can stay here. I need help running this ranch. It's hard work and I can't pay much. Probably $10 a month to start plus room and board. But you'd have a roof over your head, food to eat. And I give you my word that I will never touch you in any way you don't want. You would be an employee, not a slave. Not property. A person working for wages that you could save or spend however you chose. He paused, letting that sink in. A person with rights and choices and a future. I studied his face, looking for the lie, searching for the crack in his facade that would reveal his true intentions. Men always lied about their intentions, always said whatever they needed to say to get what they wanted. But Ethan's hazel eyes were steady and clear, and there was something in the set of his jaw that suggested integrity, suggested he actually meant what he was saying. I wanted desperately to believe him, but belief was a luxury I couldn't afford, a trap that would leave me vulnerable and hurt when the truth inevitably revealed itself. What kind of work? I asked cautiously, trying to find the hidden meaning in his words. Cooking, washing, mending, helping with the animals when needed. General ranch work. It's not easy, but it's honest labor. The kind of work any ranch hand would do. That sounded too good to be true, sounded like the kind of lie men told before they revealed what they really wanted. And if I stay, where do I sleep? Ethan gestured to the bed in the corner without hesitation. You take the bed. I'll sleep in the barn. That makes no sense, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. This is your home. Why would you sleep in the barn? He looked at me like the answer should be obvious. Because you're a woman who has been through hell and needs to feel safe. Because you need space that's yours, that nobody can invade without your permission. The barn is fine. I've slept in worse places. During the war, I spent weeks sleeping in mud with rain pouring down and shells exploding close enough to shake the ground. A barn with hay and a roof is luxury compared to that. I felt something unfamiliar stir in my chest, something that might have been hope if I hadn't learned to kill that emotion long ago, to strangle it before it could take root and grow into something that would hurt me when it died. How do I know you won't change your mind? How do I know you won't come in here one night and take what you think you paid for? You spent $100 on me. That's more than most men make in months. You're going to want something in return. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small revolver, a .32 caliber pocket pistol with a pearl handle that gleamed in the lamplight. He placed it on the table between us with a heavy thunk that seemed to echo in the quiet cabin. You keep this under your pillow. If I ever do anything that makes you feel unsafe, anything at all, you shoot me. I'd rather be dead than become the kind of man who forces himself on a woman, who breaks the trust someone has placed in him. I've seen what men like that do, seen the damage they cause, and I won't be that person. I stared at the gun, my mind racing to understand this, to find the trap hidden in this gesture. It was a test, obviously. No man would give a woman he had just purchased a loaded weapon unless he was trying to prove something, unless this was some elaborate game to make me lower my guard. But what if it wasn't loaded? What if this was all a trick to see if I would trust him, to see how I would react? As though reading my mind, Ethan picked up the revolver, opened the cylinder to show me it was fully loaded with 6 rounds, then set it back down carefully. "It's real and it's yours. Protection, not a threat. I want you to feel safe here, to know that you have power, that you're not helpless." The sun had fully set now, and the cabin was growing dark except for the warm glow of the oil lamp. Ethan stood and lit another lamp, casting more light across the rough-hewn walls, illuminating the simple furnishings and the life he had built here alone. "You don't have to decide tonight about anything. Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning about what you want to do, where you want to go, what kind of future you want to try to build." He grabbed a thick wool blanket from a chest at the foot of the bed and headed for the door. "Bolt this behind me. Don't open it for anyone, including me, unless you feel safe doing so. If you need anything during the night, anything at all, you can bang on the wall and I'll hear it in the barn." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the cabin with a loaded gun and more questions than answers. I heard his footsteps crossing to the barn, heard the barn door creak open and shut, heard the horses whinny softly in greeting. Then silence, broken only by the sound of crickets chirping outside and the distant howl of a coyote somewhere out in the darkness. I stood frozen for a long moment, unable to process what had just happened, unable to reconcile this man's actions with everything I knew about how men treated women they had purchased. I picked up the revolver with shaking hands, surprised by how heavy it was, how cold and solid and real it felt in my palm. It was heavier than I expected, substantial in a way that spoke of genuine power, of actual protection. I checked the cylinder again, confirming it was loaded, counting all 6 rounds, making sure this wasn't some trick with empty chambers or dummy bullets. Then I held it in my lap as I sat in the wooden chair by the table, staring at the bolted door, my finger resting near the trigger, ready to fire if that door opened and Ethan came back to show his true intentions. I didn't trust Ethan Barrett, could not trust him, not yet, maybe not ever. But he had cut off the collar. He had buried it deep in the earth like it was something shameful and evil. He had given me a loaded weapon and told me to shoot him if he violated my boundaries. And those actions had given me something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Hadn't felt since before Pierce first laid his hands on me. The faintest possibility that not all men were monsters, that maybe somewhere in this cruel world there existed men who actually valued women's humanity, who actually believed we deserved respect and autonomy and choice. I didn't sleep in the bed that night, couldn't bring myself to trust that much, couldn't let my guard down enough to actually rest. I sat in the chair with the gun in my lap, watching the door, watching the windows, waiting for him to come back and reveal his true intentions, waiting for the facade to crack and the real Ethan Barrett to emerge. But the door never opened. The night passed slowly, minutes dragging into hours, and my eyes burned with exhaustion, but I couldn't close them, couldn't risk being vulnerable even for a moment. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, painting the cabin in shades of silver and pale blue, I finally allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Ethan Barrett had meant what he said. Maybe he really was going to sleep in the barn. Maybe he really wasn't going to force himself on me. Maybe this wasn't all an elaborate game designed to break me more completely than I had already been broken. The possibility seemed too good to be true, seemed like the kind of hope that would destroy me when it turned out to be false, but I couldn't completely suppress it, couldn't kill it no matter how hard I tried. When full daylight came, when the sun rose over the Wyoming hills and painted the world in shades of gold, I heard sounds from the barn. The lowing of cattle being fed, the whinny of horses greeting the morning, the general noise of a ranch coming to life with the new day. I stood stiffly, my body aching from sitting in the chair all night, every muscle protesting the stillness and tension. I went to the small mirror hanging on the wall, a piece of glass in a simple wooden frame, and looked at my reflection for the first time in weeks. The face that looked back at me was gaunt and hollow-eyed, cheekbones too prominent, skin pale except where the sun had burned it. But the indentation around my neck from the collar was already starting to fade, the groove in my flesh growing less pronounced with each hour of freedom. I touched it gently, marveling again at the absence of that hated weight, at the simple ability to turn my head without feeling metal digging into my skin. A knock on the door made me jump, my hand instinctively reaching for the revolver. "Miss Morrison." Ethan's voice came through the wood, respectful and distant. "I'm going to leave some water by the door for washing. Take your time. I'll be working with the horses if you need anything." I waited until I heard his footsteps retreat, until I was certain he was gone, before unbolting the door and opening it just a crack. Outside sat a bucket of clean water, still cool from the well, and a bar of soap that smelled like lye and lavender. Steam rose from the water in the cool morning air, and I realized he must have heated it on a fire, must have taken the time and effort to provide me with warm water for washing. I brought them inside quickly and bolted the door again, then stripped off the filthy dress I had been wearing for weeks, the same dress I had been wearing when Crane died, the same dress that carried the smell of sweat and fear and degradation. I washed myself thoroughly for the first time in weeks, scrubbing away layers of dirt and dried sweat and the feeling of men's hands on my skin. The soap was harsh but clean, burning slightly in the raw places on my wrists and around my neck, but I welcomed the pain because it meant I was washing away the past, scouring myself clean of everything that had been done to me. I scrubbed until my skin was pink and raw, wishing I could wash away memories as easily as dirt, wishing water and soap could cleanse the stains that had soaked through my skin into my soul. I had no other clothes, nothing but the single filthy dress, so I had to put it back on after washing, but at least my skin was clean underneath. I braided my hair to keep it out of my face, working the tangled auburn strands into some semblance of order, trying to make myself presentable even though I wasn't sure why it mattered. Then I tucked the revolver into the pocket of my dress, feeling its weight against my hip like a promise, like power, like the ability to protect myself for the first time in years. And I went outside to find Ethan, to begin whatever this new life was going to be. He was in the corral working with a young horse, a 2-year-old chestnut with a white blaze down its face and intelligent eyes that watched Ethan's every move. He was patient and gentle, letting the animal come to him rather than forcing compliance, speaking in a low voice that I couldn't quite hear but that seemed to calm the horse. When the horse finally allowed him to touch its neck, he rewarded it with soft words and a piece of apple from his pocket, praising it like it had accomplished something remarkable. I watched from the fence, studying him, trying to understand what kind of man this was, trying to find the flaw that would explain why he was being so kind. He moved with confidence but not arrogance, with strength but not violence. There was something in the way he handled the horse that spoke of genuine respect for the animal, of understanding that trust had to be earned rather than demanded. "You're good with horses," I said, and he looked up, his face registering surprise that I had come out, that I had chosen to seek him out rather than hiding in the cabin. "Horses are honest," he said simply, continuing to stroke the young horse's neck. "Treat them right and they'll give you everything they have. Treat them wrong and they'll never trust you. There's something pure about that, something I appreciate. They don't lie or manipulate. They don't pretend to be something they're not. If they're afraid, they show it. If they trust you, they show that too. Is that why you treat people the same way?" I asked, the question coming out before I could stop it. He smiled slightly, the first real smile I had seen from him, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less weathered, less burdened by whatever weights he carried. "I try. Don't always succeed, but I try to be honest and straightforward, to earn trust rather than demand it." I climbed over the fence, moving slowly the way Ethan had approached the horse, the way you approach anything that might bolt if you move too fast. "I've decided to stay for now, but I need some things to be clear between us." "All right," he said, his full attention on me now, the horse forgotten. "I do the work you assign and you pay me wages, real wages that I can save. You don't touch me unless I say you can. You don't come into the cabin without knocking and waiting for permission. And if you break any of those rules, I leave or I use this." I patted the pocket where the gun rested, its weight a comfort and a promise. "Agreed," Ethan said without hesitation, without trying to negotiate or modify my terms. He held out his hand. "Do we have a deal?" I looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, studying it. Shaking hands was what partners did, what equals did, what people with mutual respect did. I couldn't remember the last time someone had offered to shake my hand like I was a real person worthy of such a gesture, like my agreement mattered, like I had agency and choice. Slowly, feeling like I was stepping off a cliff into empty air, I reached out and clasped his hand. His grip was warm and calloused from years of hard work, firm without being crushing, respectful without being hesitant. "Deal," I said, and the word felt like a beginning, like the first step on a journey I couldn't yet see the end of. And so I began a new life at the Barrett Ranch, though I didn't yet know if it would truly be a life or just another form of captivity with prettier words and gentler chains. The work was hard, just as Ethan had promised. Harder than anything I had done before, because this work mattered, because someone was depending on me to do it right. I woke before dawn to start breakfast, learning to coax flames from the wood stove that was temperamental and required patience and skill. I spent hours cooking over the hot stove, learning to bake bread in the Dutch oven, preserving vegetables from the small garden behind the cabin, making meals that were simple but filling and nutritious. I washed clothes in the creek, scrubbing until my hands were raw and cracked, hanging everything to dry on lines strung between cottonwood trees that rustled in the constant Wyoming wind. I mended torn shirts and pants by lamplight, learning to make neat tiny stitches that would hold under hard use, stitches that wouldn't come apart when Ethan was working cattle or fixing fences. I learned to milk the cow, to collect eggs from the chickens, to churn butter until my arms ached. I learned the rhythm of ranch life, the way each day had its tasks and its requirements, the way the work never truly ended but rolled from one day into the next in an endless cycle of maintenance and care. But it was honest work, and that made all the difference in ways I couldn't fully explain. When Ethan asked me to do something, it was a request, not a command, and he phrased it as such. "Would you mind," he would say, or "could you help me with, never do this," or "I want." When I made mistakes, as I often did in those first weeks because I had never run a household before, had never been taught the skills that ranch life required, he corrected me with patience rather than anger. He showed me how to fix what I had done wrong, explained why certain things had to be done certain ways, taught me like I was capable of learning rather than just stupid property that should already know everything. And true to his word, he never touched me beyond the occasional accidental brush of hands when passing dishes at mealtime, always accompanied by a quick "sorry" or "excuse me," like he had violated some sacred boundary. He slept in the barn even when the nights grew cold, and I knew he would be more comfortable in the cabin. I heard him moving around sometimes in the early morning hours, feeding the animals before I had even risen, working himself to exhaustion day after day. I wondered what drove him, what demons chased him, what had made him the kind of man who would spend his hard-earned money to buy a woman just to set her free. One evening in late August, after we had finished supper and were sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, after weeks of working together in a silence that had grown comfortable rather than tense, I finally asked him, "Why did you do it? Why did you buy me when you could have just walked away and pretended you never saw me?" Ethan was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer, might tell me it was none of my business, might retreat into the same silence most men used when they didn't want to explain themselves. Then he said, "I had a sister. Her name was Emily. She was 2 years younger than me, smart as a whip, beautiful inside and out, full of life and hope and dreams about the future." His voice grew rough with emotion. "When I was 20 and she was 18, our parents died of cholera within 3 days of each other. We had no money, no family willing to take us in, nobody who cared what happened to 2 orphans in a city that had hundreds just like us. I tried to find work, tried to keep us fed and housed, but it wasn't enough. The jobs I could get didn't pay enough for both of us to survive. Emily got a job in a saloon to help make ends meet, serving drinks and cleaning, and I thought that would be fine, thought we could make it work together, thought I could protect her from anything bad." He paused, and I heard the pain in his silence, felt the weight of whatever was coming next. I was wrong. The saloon owner started making demands, said she owed him money for her room and board, claimed she had broken things that needed to be paid for. Before I understood what was happening, before I could stop it, he had sold her contract to a man heading to San Francisco. I tried to stop it, got into a fight with 3 of the owner's men who held me down while Emily was dragged away screaming my name. They beat me so badly I was unconscious for 2 days, and by the time I could stand again, could think clearly enough to go after her, Emily was gone. What happened to her? I asked, though I already knew the answer. could feel the shape of it in my bones. I don't know, Ethan said, and his voice was hollow with old grief. I searched for 5 years, spent every cent I had and more. Went to San Francisco, asked questions in every saloon and gambling den and brothel, followed every lead no matter how slim. But she had disappeared into that world where women vanish and nobody cares enough to look for them, where they become nameless faces that nobody remembers or mourns. I think she's probably dead. I hope she's dead because the alternative, the thought of her still alive and suffering, is worse than death. And I think she died believing I abandoned her when she needed me most. Died thinking her brother didn't love her enough to save her. That wasn't your fault, I said softly, meaning it, understanding in a way most people couldn't how impossible it would have been for him to find her to save her. Maybe not, he agreed. But I couldn't save her, and that failure has haunted me every day since. So when I saw you standing in that street wearing a collar like an animal, being sold to men whose reputations I knew, whose previous property had met bad ends, I saw Emily. I saw my sister's face on your body, saw the same fear and resignation and rage in your eyes that I imagined she must have felt. And I knew I couldn't walk away, couldn't let another woman suffer when I had the power and the money to stop it. I had to at least try to save one person, even if I was too late to save my sister. We sat in silence for a long time after that, two damaged people watching the stars wheel slowly across the Wyoming sky, each carrying wounds that would never fully heal but might scar over into something bearable. I felt something shift inside me, a subtle rearrangement of my understanding of who Ethan Barrett was and why he had done what he did. He wasn't rescuing me to be a hero, wasn't trying to prove his moral superiority, wasn't looking for gratitude or worship. He was trying to atone for a failure that wasn't his fault, trying to make sense of a world that had stolen someone he loved, trying to find meaning in suffering by preventing someone else's suffering. I'm sorry about Emily, I finally said, the words inadequate but sincere. I'm sorry the world is so cruel to women who have no protection, no power, no way to defend themselves. I'm sorry about whatever happened to make you so afraid of trusting people, Ethan said. I know it wasn't one thing. I know it was 1,000 things, 1,000 betrayals and violations and lessons that taught you men are dangerous. You don't have to tell me unless you want to, he continued. Your past is yours to share or keep private. But if you ever want to talk about it, I'll listen without judgment. And surprisingly, I found that I did want to tell him, wanted to speak the words I had never spoken to anyone, wanted to say out loud what had been done to me so that it would stop living only in my head where it grew larger and more terrible with each remembering. So I did, sitting there in the darkness where I couldn't see his face clearly enough to watch judgment form, where the shadows hid my shame and my scars. I told him about my mother's death, about the saloon owner who had claimed false debts and sold me the first time. I told him about Howard Pierce and the 8 months I spent as his personal property, about Vincent Kane and the hotel room I couldn't leave, about the 2 times I tried to kill myself and how Kane had stopped me not out of concern but because he owned me and I wasn't allowed to damage his property. And I told him about Thaddeus Crane, who had seemed civilized on the surface with his fine clothes and educated speech and mansion full of expensive things, but who had been the cruelest of all because he had enjoyed breaking my spirit as much as using my body. I told him about the collar, about kneeling on the floor while the blacksmith welded it shut around my throat, about Crane standing there watching with satisfaction as I was marked permanently as his possession. When I finished, my voice was hoarse and my hands were shaking, and I expected to see pity or disgust or discomfort on Ethan's face when I finally looked at him. But he didn't look at me with pity or disgust. He looked at me with respect, as though I had revealed something brave rather than shameful, as though surviving what I had survived was an accomplishment worthy of admiration. You survived, he said simply. That takes strength most people don't have, strength I'm not sure I would have had in your position. You endured things that would have broken most people, and you're still here, still fighting, still capable of hope even if you won't admit it. Some days I'm not sure survival was worth it, I said honestly. Some days I think dying would have been easier, would have hurt less in the long run. But you're here, Ethan said. You're free of that collar, and tomorrow you can decide what kind of life you want to build. You have choices now, Opportunities that didn't exist a week ago. That's worth something, isn't it? I thought about that as I went inside to sleep that night. Thought about choices and opportunities and the possibility of a future that wasn't just more suffering. For the first time since I could remember, I laid down in the bed instead of sitting watch in the chair, allowed myself to close my eyes and drift toward something approaching genuine sleep. I kept the revolver under my pillow, my hand resting on its grip, but I allowed myself to relax enough to actually rest. And when I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of Ethan already at work outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Felt almost safe. The weeks turned into months, and autumn came to Wyoming with a violence of color that took my breath away. The cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, the aspens in the distant mountains blazed orange and red, and the sky deepened into a blue so intense it hurt to look at. A rhythm developed between Ethan and me, a pattern of work and meals and evening conversations that became comfortable and familiar. We worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs, dividing tasks without needing to discuss them. He taught me to ride better, to handle the bay mare with confidence, to read the land and the weather. He taught me to shoot accurately, setting up targets and correcting my stance and grip until I could hit what I aimed at more often than not. I learned the rhythms of ranch life, the way the seasons dictated the work, the way the land demanded attention and care. I learned which cows were likely to have difficult births, which horses needed extra attention, which parts of the fence line were prone to breaking. He taught me to track deer through the sage, to read signs in the dirt that told stories about what animals had passed and when. And I taught him that food could be more than fuel, creating meals that made him close his eyes with pleasure, experimenting with spices and techniques until I could produce dinners that felt like celebrations rather than just sustenance. We talked in the evenings, sharing stories about our pasts and our dreams for the future, slowly revealing ourselves to each other in ways that felt both dangerous and necessary. I learned that Ethan had been a soldier briefly during the Civil War, fighting for the Union until a leg wound sent him home with a limp he tried to hide, but that became more pronounced when he was tired. He had used his army pay and years of hard work to buy this land, building everything with his own hands, board by board and fence post by fence post. His dream was simple, to have a ranch large enough to support a family, to live honestly without owing anything to anyone, to build something lasting that couldn't be taken away by circumstances or other people's cruelty. I found myself softening toward him in ways that terrified me, noticing things I had trained myself not to notice. I noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, really smiled. Not the polite smile he gave strangers, but the genuine expression of joy that transformed his entire face. I noticed the strength in his hands when he worked, the way he could gentle a spooked horse or mend a broken fence with equal competence. I noticed the gentleness in his voice when he talked to the animals, the way he spoke to them like they were intelligent beings worthy of respect. I noticed how he always made sure I ate first, serving me before taking his own portion, how he left wildflowers on the porch sometimes without saying anything, how he respected every boundary I had set without ever making me feel burdensome or difficult. I noticed, and I tried very hard not to care because caring led to vulnerability and vulnerability led to pain. But caring crept up on me anyway, quiet and insistent as the changing seasons, impossible to stop no matter how hard I fought against it. By September, when the air grew crisp and the aspen trees turned gold on the distant mountains, I had to admit to myself that I was developing feelings for Ethan Barrett, feelings that went beyond gratitude or simple friendship. It was terrifying in ways I couldn't fully articulate. Every man I had ever cared about even a little, every person I had allowed myself to trust even slightly, had betrayed that trust in ways that left scars. But Ethan kept being exactly who he claimed to be, day after day, week after week. Honest, kind, patient, utterly without expectations of me beyond the work we had agreed upon. One evening in early October, a storm rolled in suddenly the way storms did in Wyoming, the temperature dropping 20 degrees in less than an hour, rain lashing the ranch in cold sheets that turned the dust to mud and made the horses restless in the corral. I was in the cabin preparing supper when lightning struck close enough to rattle the windows and make the oil lamps flicker. I looked out and saw Ethan in the barn, but I knew the barn roof leaked in several places because I had heard him talking about needing to fix it before winter. He would be soaked and freezing all night, possibly sick by morning if the temperature kept dropping the way it was. I made a decision that surprised me, that felt both dangerous and necessary. I walked out into the rain, getting drenched immediately, my dress plastered to my body and my hair streaming water. I ran to the barn and burst through the door, and Ethan looked up in surprise from where he was spreading his blanket on a pile of hay. "What are you doing out here? You'll catch your death." "So will you," I said, raising my voice over the sound of rain hammering on the leaky roof. "That roof leaks like a sieve and it's going to be near freezing tonight. You need to come inside." "Catherine, we talked about this," Ethan said, and I heard the concern in his voice. "You need your space, need to feel safe, need boundaries that I won't cross. I need you not to die of pneumonia because you're too stubborn to come in out of the rain," I said firmly. "I'm not a child, Ethan. I can handle you sleeping on the floor by the fireplace without falling apart. Come inside before you freeze." He looked like he might argue, but another crack of lightning made the decision for him. We ran back to the cabin together, splashing through puddles that were forming in the yard, and once inside I threw him a blanket. "Get out of those wet clothes before you freeze. I'll turn around." I busied myself at the stove, stirring the stew I had been making, listening to the rustle of fabric as Ethan changed into dry clothes behind me. When I turned back around, he was wrapped in the blanket, his wet things hanging by the fireplace to dry. His hair was dripping and he looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way I had never seen him, less like the competent rancher and more like just a man trying to stay warm. "Thank you," he said quietly, and I heard genuine gratitude in his voice. We ate dinner in a silence that was charged with something neither of us knew how to name, something that hummed between us like electricity before a storm. Outside, the storm raged on, wind howling and rain pounding, but inside the cabin was warm and dry and filled with the kind of domestic intimacy that I had never experienced before, had never known was possible. This was what safety felt like, I realized. This was what it meant to share space with someone who didn't want to hurt you, who respected your boundaries even when you relaxed them, who valued your comfort over his own desires. After dinner, Ethan settled on the floor near the fireplace with his saddle for a pillow, wrapping himself in the blanket like he had done this 100 times before. I lay in the bed watching the play of firelight on the ceiling, listening to the rain drum against the roof, listening to Ethan's breathing slow and deepen as he fell asleep. I knew I should sleep too, knew I was exhausted from the day's work, but my mind wouldn't quiet. I kept thinking about the man lying on the floor, about all the ways he had proven himself different from every other man I had known, about the possibility that maybe I could trust him with more than just my labor and my presence. "Ethan," I said into the darkness, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." His voice came back immediately, alert, like he hadn't been sleeping at all. "Why have you never married?" He was quiet for a moment, and I heard him shift on the floor. "I came close once before the war. There was a girl named Sarah who lived on a neighboring farm. We talked about getting married, about combining our family's land, about building a life together. But when I came back from the war wounded and changed, she had married someone else, a banker's son with money and prospects. I was angry at first, felt betrayed, but looking back I think she did me a favor. We wanted different things. She wanted comfort and security and social standing. I wanted something else, though I didn't know what at the time. "What do you want now?" I asked, the question feeling dangerous but necessary. "Partnership, I suppose," Ethan said slowly, like he was working out the answer as he spoke. "Someone to build a life with, not someone to take care of or control. Someone who wants to be there by choice, not because society or economics forces them. Someone who sees me as a person, not as a means to an end or a solution to their problems. Maybe that's asking too much, maybe that kind of partnership doesn't really exist, but it's what I want." My heart hammered in my chest, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying. "I don't think it's asking too much. I think it's what everyone should want, what every relationship should be built on." I heard him shift again, heard the floorboards creak. "What do you want, Catherine?" It was the first time he had asked me that, The first time anyone had asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what I should want or what I was allowed to have. I thought about it, really thought about it, trying to articulate desires I had spent years suppressing. I want to never be owned again, I said slowly. I want to make my own choices about where I go and what I do and who I spend my time with. I want to know what it feels like to be with someone because I choose to be, not because I have no other option, not because I'm trying to survive. I hesitated, afraid to say it out loud, afraid that speaking it would make it real and vulnerable to destruction. I want to be seen as a whole person, not just as a body or a set of skills or a means to satisfy someone else's needs. That makes sense, Ethan said, and I heard the understanding in his voice, heard that he really did understand what I was trying to say. You deserve that. You deserve all of that and more. You deserve to have choices and autonomy and a life that's yours to build however you want. The storm blew itself out overnight, and by morning the world was washed clean and bright, every color more vivid, every surface gleaming with residual moisture. Ethan went back to sleeping in the barn without us discussing it, but something had changed between us. The air felt charged with possibility, and I caught myself watching him more often, wondering what it would be like to touch him not out of obligation but out of desire, wondering what it would feel like to choose intimacy instead of having it forced upon me. I tried to push the thoughts away, tried to remind myself that I wasn't ready, that the damage done to me ran too deep, that the scars were too permanent for me to ever have a normal relationship with a man. But the thoughts kept coming back, insistent as the turning of the seasons, impossible to ignore. In late October, when the first snow was threatening and we were working to get the last of the winter preparations finished, 3 men rode onto the Barrett Ranch just before sunset. I was hanging laundry when I saw them approach, and something about their bearing made me instinctively reach for the revolver I now carried in my apron pocket at all times. These men didn't look like neighbors or drifters looking for work. They looked like trouble. I walked quickly to where Ethan was repairing fence posts, my heart already racing with fear. "We have visitors," I said quietly. "They don't look friendly." Ethan straightened, his face growing serious, and I saw him assess the situation in seconds. "Go inside and bolt the door. Don't come out unless I call for you." "Ethan, please," I started to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped me. "Catherine, trust me on this. Go inside now." I wanted to argue, wanted to stay and help, but the urgency in his voice convinced me. I went inside but positioned myself at the window where I could see and hear what was happening, my hand closed around the revolver, making sure it was loaded and ready. The 3 men dismounted in the yard, moving with the casual arrogance of people who were used to intimidating others. They were rough-looking, the kind of drifters who made their living on the wrong side of the law, with hard eyes and hands that rested too easily on their gun belts. The one in front, a man with a scarred face and cruel eyes that reminded me too much of men I had known, looked around the ranch with the assessing gaze of someone evaluating potential loot. "You must be Ethan Barrett," the scarred man said, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "I am," Ethan replied, his voice calm but his posture subtly shifted, ready. "What can I do for you gentlemen? We hear you bought a woman a few months back in Fort Bridger. Woman with dark hair, wearing a collar." "That right." My blood ran cold, ice flooding through my veins. They had come for me. Somehow someone had sent them to retrieve what they considered stolen property, to take me back to whatever hell they thought I belonged in. "I bought a woman's contract, yes," Ethan said carefully, his voice giving nothing away. "What business is that of yours? Thaddeus Crane's nephew thinks you might have taken advantage of his uncle's death to acquire property that should have gone to the family. He wants the woman returned. Says he'll pay you what you spent plus $20 for your trouble." The scarred man smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "That's a fair offer, friend. More than fair. The woman is not for sale," Ethan said flatly. "Not to you, not to Crane's nephew, not to anyone." "That's not smart, friend," the scarred man said, and his hand moved closer to his gun. "Jackson Crane is not a man you want to cross. He's got money and influence, and he doesn't take kindly to people stealing what belongs to his family." "I don't care who Jackson Crane is or how much money he has," Ethan said, and I heard steel in his voice, heard the soldier he had once been. The woman stays here. Now get off my land. The scarred man's expression hardened. Maybe you didn't hear me right. This is not a negotiation. We're taking the woman whether you cooperate or not. Ethan's posture shifted again, and I recognized the stance of someone ready for violence, someone who had killed before and would do it again if necessary. Get off my land now. This is your last warning. Everything happened very fast after that. The scarred man drew his gun, his hand moving in a practiced blur, but Ethan was faster. His shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. The other two men went for their weapons, and I didn't hesitate. I threw open the door and fired twice, my bullets kicking up dirt at the feet of the second man, making him stumble back with a curse. The next one goes through your chest, I shouted, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice, by the lack of fear. Drop your guns and ride out, or I swear I will kill you where you stand. The two uninjured men looked at each other, then at the scarred man clutching his bleeding shoulder and cursing, then at me standing in the doorway with a smoking revolver and eyes that promised I meant every word. Whatever they had expected, it wasn't this, wasn't a woman who would fight back, wasn't resistance that had teeth. They dropped their guns, hauled their wounded companion onto his horse with rough efficiency, and rode away at a gallop, disappearing into the gathering dusk like the cowards they were. I stood frozen, the revolver shaking in my hands now that the immediate danger had passed, adrenaline flooding through me making my knees weak. Ethan walked over and gently took the gun from me, setting the safety before handing it back. Are you all right? He asked, his voice rough with concern. I think so, I managed to say. Are you? Yes. Thank you for not staying inside like I asked. I couldn't let them take me, I said, and my voice was stronger now, more certain. And I couldn't let them hurt you. Not when you're the only person who has ever treated me like I mattered. Ethan looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between admiration and concern and something else I didn't want to name yet. We should prepare in case they come back with more men. Jackson Crane has money and influence like his friend said. This probably isn't over. But the men didn't come back that night or the next day or the day after that. A week later, Ethan rode into Fort Bridger and came back with news that changed everything. Jackson Crane has been arrested, he told me, his face showing relief and satisfaction. Federal marshal got him on charges of fraud and embezzlement. Apparently his uncle's estate was mired in debt and legal troubles, and Crane had been trying to liquidate assets, including humans he considered property, to pay off his creditors. But a marshal had been investigating him for months, and the attempt to reclaim you gave the marshal the evidence he needed to make an arrest that would stick. It's over, Ethan said, and his voice was gentle as he delivered the news that would change my life. No one is coming for you. You're free, Catherine. Legally and completely free. Crane's claim on you never had any validity in the first place. What his uncle did was kidnapping and false imprisonment. The law just didn't care enough to prosecute until money and fraud were involved, until rich men's interests were threatened. I sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet, like reality had fundamentally changed in ways I couldn't fully process. So I could leave right now and no one could stop me. I could go anywhere, be anyone. That's right, Ethan confirmed. You could go anywhere, be anyone you want. The world is open to you in ways it hasn't been since before your mother died. You have choices now, real choices, not just the illusion of options. I looked around the cabin at the life I had built here over the past 4 months, at the simple furnishings and the supplies I had organized, at the evidence of work and care and slowly growing comfort. It was not the life I would have chosen if I had been given a choice at 18 or 20. Not the future my mother had dreamed of for me when she taught me to read and write in that cramped room above the saloon. But now, at 21, having survived things that would have broken most people, this life felt precious in ways I couldn't have imagined back when I stood in Fort Bridger Street wearing a collar. This simple cabin with its stone fireplace and single room felt like safety. This hard work felt like purpose. This quiet companionship with a man who had proven himself worthy of trust felt like something I didn't want to lose. What if I don't want to leave? I asked quietly, the words feeling like the most dangerous thing I had ever said. Ethan looked at me, and the hope in his eyes was almost painful to see, raw and vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen from him before. Then you could stay. Not as an employee anymore, not as someone working for wages. As a partner, as someone building this ranch alongside me, as someone who chooses to be here because they want to be, not because they have no other options. Ethan, I don't know if I can be what you need, I said, fear making my voice shake. I'm broken in ways I don't think I can fix. The things that were done to me, the things I survived, they left marks that go deeper than my skin. I don't know if I can ever be normal, if I can ever have the kind of relationship you deserve. He crossed the room and knelt in front of me, not touching me but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the sincerity in his hazel eyes. You're not broken, he said firmly. You're scarred, but scars are proof of survival, proof of strength. And I'm not asking you to be anything other than who you are right now. I'm not asking you to be ready for things you're not ready for. Not asking you to force yourself into some shape you think I want. I'm just asking if you would consider staying, building something here with me, seeing where this goes between us without pressure or expectations or demands. I looked into his eyes and saw no pressure, no expectation of immediate reciprocation, just honest affection and infinite patience. I thought about the collar buried deep in the Wyoming earth beneath this cabin. I thought about the gun under my pillow that I had never needed to use against him. I thought about the way he said my name like it was something valuable, something worth preserving. I would like to stay, I said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff, like surrender, like hope. But slowly. I need to do this slowly. Need to learn how to trust at my own pace. As slow as you need, Ethan promised, and I heard the truth in his voice. I've waited this long to find someone worth waiting for. Can wait longer. I can wait forever if that's what you need. The winter of 1872 was harsh, with snow piling deep and temperatures plunging below zero for days at a time. But inside the cabin, warmth grew between Ethan and me, a slow thawing of the ice I had built around my heart. We worked together to keep the ranch running, feeding animals in bitter cold, breaking ice on water troughs with axes, keeping the cabin warm and the food supplies adequate. We developed a routine that was domestic and comfortable, and slowly, incrementally, I allowed myself to get closer to him. I let him hold my hand sometimes in the evenings when we sat by the fire. I leaned against him when we sat watching the flames, feeling his steady heartbeat and solid presence. I allowed myself to enjoy the sound of his laughter and the warmth of his smile, allowed myself to notice when he looked at me with affection, allowed myself to imagine what it might be like to choose intimacy instead of having it forced upon me. And one night in January, when the cold was so intense that even the barn was uninhabitable for sleeping, when ice formed on the inside of the windows and our breath made clouds in the air, I invited him to sleep in the cabin without any pretense about storms or necessity. You can take the bed, I said, my heart racing as I made the offer. I'll sleep in the chair like I used to. We could share, Ethan said carefully, watching my face for signs of fear or discomfort. Just sleep, nothing else. I would stay on top of the covers if that makes you feel better. But it's cold, Catherine. There's no sense in either of us being uncomfortable when that bed is big enough for two people to sleep respectfully, when we could share warmth without crossing any boundaries. It was a risk, the biggest risk I had taken since deciding to stay here. Everything in me screamed that this was how it started, how the boundaries came down, how the bad things happened. But I was tired of being afraid, tired of letting my past dictate my future, tired of running from the possibility of something good because I was terrified it would turn out to be another version of something bad. And more than anything, I trusted Ethan Barrett. All right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We lay in the bed that night, a careful space between us, both fully clothed with our clothes and boots still on in case we needed to get up quickly to tend the fire or the animals. I was so tense I thought I might shatter, every muscle rigid, every nerve screaming warnings. But Ethan did exactly what he had promised. He lay still, his breathing slow and even, making no move toward me, giving me space and time and patience. And gradually, as the hours passed and nothing bad happened, as the warmth from his body kept the cold at bay and his presence felt protective rather than threatening, I felt myself relax. I moved closer, just slightly, and felt the warmth radiating from him. I allowed my hand to rest near his, our fingers almost touching, close enough that I could feel the heat of his skin without actually making contact. "Is this all right?" I whispered into the darkness. "This is perfect," Ethan whispered back, and I heard the emotion in his voice. Heard that this simple gesture of trust meant as much to him as it did to me. And it was perfect in a way I had never experienced before. This quiet intimacy without pressure. This sharing of space without demands. This closeness without violation. I fell asleep that way, close enough to touch but not touching, safe enough to rest. And I slept better than I had in years. After that night, we shared the bed regularly. And I found myself healing in ways I hadn't thought possible. Touch became something I could enjoy rather than endure. Closeness became something I could want rather than fear. And slowly, tentatively, over the course of months, I began to imagine a future where intimacy was not just bearable but desired, where I could choose to be with someone because I wanted to, not because I was forced to. Spring came to Wyoming with an explosion of wildflowers and new grass, and the ranch felt like it was waking from a long sleep, coming back to life. I planted a larger garden, putting in seeds for vegetables and herbs, working the soil with my hands and feeling connected to the earth in a way I never had before. Ethan bought more cattle, expanding the herd, talking about his plans for the future as though I would automatically be part of them, as though my presence was a given rather than a question. One evening in May, as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, as the world felt new and full of possibility, I turned to Ethan and said the words I had been building toward for months. "I think I'm ready." He looked at me, his eyes asking the question. "Ready for what?" "Ready to be with you. Really be with you, not just sharing space or working together. Ready for intimacy, for partnership, for whatever this is becoming between us. Not because I have to, not because I owe you anything, but because I want to. Because I love you." The words hung in the air between us, precious and fragile and terrifying. Ethan looked at me with wonder, like I had given him something more valuable than gold, more precious than all the land in Wyoming. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "There's no rush, Catherine. I can wait as long as you need. I can wait years if that's what it takes." "I'm sure," I said, and I meant it with every part of my being. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. We stood together, and Ethan held out his hand. I took it, feeling the calluses and the warmth and the strength, and we walked inside the cabin together. And for the first time in my life, I experienced intimacy as something beautiful, something chosen, something that healed rather than harmed. Ethan was patient and gentle, constantly checking to make sure I was comfortable, letting me set the pace and the boundaries, treating me like I was precious rather than property. And when I cried afterward, he held me and understood that they were tears of release. Tears for everything I had lost and everything I had found, grief for the girl I had been and joy for the woman I was becoming. "I love you too," he said into my hair, his arms strong and safe around me. "I have loved you since the day I saw you standing in that street refusing to let them break your spirit. I will love you for the rest of my life, for as long as you'll have me." We were married in Fort Bridger on a bright day in June of 1873. With a few local friends as witnesses and the preacher who asked no questions about my past. I wore a simple blue dress that I had sewn myself from fabric Ethan bought for me in town, and Ethan wore his best suit, which was still worn and patched but clean and pressed. The ceremony was brief and the celebration modest, but when I said my vows I meant every word. I was choosing this man, choosing this life, choosing this future. And that choice felt like reclaiming myself, like finally having power over my own destiny. Our life together was not easy because life on a Wyoming ranch was never easy. There were hard years when cattle prices dropped or the weather destroyed crops, when we had to stretch every dollar and work from dawn until dark just to survive. But we faced everything together as true partners, making decisions jointly, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating successes together. I discovered I had a talent for managing the ranch's finances, keeping meticulous records of income and expenses, making smart decisions about when to buy and sell. Ethan discovered that having someone to share the burden made even the hardest work bearable, that partnership multiplied joy and divided sorrow. In the spring of 1875, I realized I was pregnant. The discovery filled me with joy and terror in equal measure. I had never thought I would have children, had never believed I would find someone I trusted enough to create a family with, had never imagined I could be a mother after everything that had been done to me. But as my belly grew and Ethan fussed over me with protective concern, I found myself excited about the future in a way I had never allowed myself to be. Our son was born in December of 1875, a healthy baby boy with Ethan's hazel eyes and my dark hair. We named him Samuel after Ethan's father, and I fell in love with my child in a way that was almost overwhelming in its intensity. The years that followed brought more children, more growth, more life built on the foundation we had created together. And through it all, that collar stayed buried deep in the Wyoming earth, a symbol of what I had survived and what I had overcome. The cowboy had cut off my collar and buried it deep, but what he had really given me was something far more valuable. He had given me the chance to discover who I could be when I was no longer defined by what men had made me. And I had become someone extraordinary, not despite my scars but because of them, not in spite of my past but informed by it and ultimately triumphant over it. I had been owned, but I had reclaimed myself. I had worn a collar, but I had broken free. And in the end, that freedom built on love and respect and mutual choice was worth more than all the gold in the territories.